Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Bullony Basketball. You guys already know I'm here with my co-host Johnny. How's it going, Johnny?
Pretty good, Garrett. Here in the Chicagoland area, we got our first batch of snow last night. So that's a bit exciting as we approach the end of the year. Always a good time to look back, reflect, and see kind of what happened the past year. And I was saw the Lakers win the NBA championship. But just excited to get back and talk some more basketball and kind of talk about who we think might win it moving forward. But pretty good. How about you?
Not too bad. Obviously, we're going through the holiday season, getting through the new year. We're actually recording this on Wednesday, day in advance of New Year's Eve, and we just passed Christmas too. This is why I got this Crystal P. Maravich jersey on. I wore it for the special occasion. But we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Our first full week of basketball, I'd say, is now past, and a lot of good things came from it. But obviously, we got some bad news as well. And we're gonna start with one bit of bad news with the Brooklyn Nets. They've looked pretty decent so far when they're fully healthy, all playing. But Spencer Dinwiddie, a key part of the team, has a partial ACL tear now. So what do you make out of the Dinwiddie news?
Yeah, I think the Dinwiddie news is obviously something that affects the landscape in the East. Numbers wise, it doesn't look like a huge impact just because he plays alongside both Katie and Kyrie. But I think a lot of it is just now how Nash manages the rotation. I don't think he has any intentions of starting Karis LeVert, so I expect to see either Timothy Luwawu Cabarrot or Landry Shamet enter the starting rotation. So we'll just monitor that moving forward. And then something that not a lot of people might know is that every single minute that Katie has played on the court, Kyrie has also played on the court. And so I think that might have to change now just to basically give the Nets one and or two ball handlers on the court at any given moment. So having Dinwiddie there was a luxury. And I'm kind of just interested to see what Nash does moving forward. How do you think it plays out?
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up with Durant and Kyrie playing all their minutes the same because, I mean, obviously this takes a hit at their depth. So I think that they're going to have to kind of alternate and stagger a little bit more. We've seen it with the Lakers with LeBron and AD. We've seen it with the Rockets over the past few years with James Harden and whether it's like Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook. Um, and we'll probably see it with John Wall. I'm assuming when he comes back from COVID. But I think it just kind of sucks. You don't want to lose a player that caliber. I mean, if you guys remember, a few weeks ago, I picked him as sixth man of the year when I assumed he was coming off the bench. Obviously, it seems like Karis LeVert's going to take that role now, but you don't want to lose a player that caliber no matter what. I mean, he was a fringe all-star um, last season, and I think there's a good case that he very well could have made it. I think the edge kind of gave to guys that were more so higher up in the standings like Sabonis, Bam, and so on. But there's a very good case that he could have made it last year. So you don't want to lose a player like that. And it definitely takes a toll on their depth, which I think that they have a lot of. But again, it just kind of sucks the way the injuries are a part of the game.
Yeah, and it seems like every team's going to go through some sort of bug, but it's not every team that's necessarily going to lose a top five, top six rotation player for the year, and that's likely what it looks like is going to happen with Dinwiddie. It's not official that he's out for the year yet, but early prognosis shows that that's the most likely outcome.
Yeah, and obviously that's not the only bit of bad news per se. Over this past week, we had some pretty embarrassing games. Um, I don't know if there's really. I can't remember the last time someone lost by 50 points necessarily. Uh, it might honestly be that Bucks or that Bulls Bucks playoff game from 5 years ago. I don't know if you remember, the game 6, and the Bulls blew them off the court. But uh, we had two in 1 week that were basically around 50 points. Of course, Kawhi Leonard, Jimmy Butler weren't playing, but I'm going to ask you, which of these losses do you think was worse? The Mavericks beating the Clippers by 51 or the Bucks beating the Heat by 47?
Yeah, I personally lean that Mavericks over Clippers for a couple of reasons. The first being that the Clippers scored 27 points in the first half. That's just flat out embarrassing. I don't care who you're missing. You cannot have back-to-back quarters where you score less than 15 points. Um, Outside of that, you're playing against a team that's not a particularly good defense. Um, they're obviously Dallas obviously had um, per numbers the greatest offense of all time last year, but that's still no excuse as to why you only put up 27 points in the first half. Um, on top of that, Dallas was missing Kristaps Porzingis, their second best player, so it just seems like a lot of things could have gone in Clippers favor, and they just came out flat. Um, but I think they came out flat to like a different degree that we don't see very often. It's one thing to lose a game by 20 points or whatever and kind of get blown off your court, but to lose by 51 is unseen, unheard of, and for that reason, I lean towards that Clippers loss.
Yeah, and I know Paul George was saying like they were still like getting over like the Christmas vibes and stuff like that, but I mean they did play on Christmas, um, and they played really well on that game too, and they had a day off as well. So I don't know if I can like completely believe that, but like you said, scoring 27 points is definitely tough, and that's why I'd probably lean toward that one being worse. Of course, they didn't have Kawhi, but I mean if we look at the premise of these teams, one of them was 48 win team that forced the Warriors to six before Kawhi and Paul George, while adding Paul George and Kawhi later on, but one of them's playing. I know it's not the exact same team now, but at least like a majority of the players, the kind of culture is still there. And then when you look at like the Miami Heat, they weren't even a playoff team before Jimmy Butler. Not saying that they wouldn't be necessarily without him this year, but I think especially when the Bucks make a record of 3 pointers in a game, like it's like okay, they had a hot shooting night. But as for the Mavericks, a lot of them didn't really. There was no one that really like played great. I mean, Luca had a solid game. I don't know if it was like an A+ game by his standards. Josh Richardson shot well, but I don't know. I think that the Clippers' loss was pretty bad, to say the least.
Yeah, it kind of as you alluded to, it's not like any of those Clippers had career nights or the team had, a career night putting up making 24 3-pointers. It was just it seemed like a pedestrian night. It was just that the Clippers literally couldn't get anything to fall in that first half and just dug themselves such a big hole that they couldn't even crawl out of it.
Yep, for sure. And I mean, that all happened on a certain day, which we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into this one day in the regular season. I can't remember a day that was this crazy. Um, and it was just kind of mayhem on Sunday. Obviously, the Mavericks smacked the Clippers. We had the Hornets stun the Nets, which was pretty crazy. The Pelicans and Spurs went to the final buzzer. The Cavs destroyed the Sixers. The Knicks destroyed the Bucks. Damian Lee game winner over the Bulls, and then the Pacers at the end edged out the Celtics with a final Domantas Sabonis uh, shot to win the game. So, of all that, what were your takeaways pretty much from this whole Sunday Funday?
Yeah, kind of as you mentioned, just a lot of games that either went to the wire, a lot of upsets. I mean, if you look at it, you know, um, Hornets beating the Nets, obviously something big. Don't want to take away too much from it. That Nets team, outside of Katie and Kyrie, the next highest scorer was Joe Harris with 13 points. So cold shooting night. Once again, not going to necessarily look into it too much. You look at the Pelicans and the Spurs. It's a team. It's a battle of two Western Conference teams that are trying to sneak into the playoffs this year. Looks like Brandon Ingram is set up for a really big season. So excited to see where he goes. Currently averaging 23, 7, and 7. Um, him and Zion should make a nice connection, and then Lonzo shooting the ball with a lot more confidence. So I like the way that that team's headed. Um, Cavs over the Sixers, not a whole lot of takeaways there. Cleveland is playing some good ball this year. That backcourt looks like it's going to be a lot better than it's been in the past with Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. Um, Joel Embiid didn't play, so I guess there's somewhat of an excuse that the Sixers have, but once again, just really couldn't get anything going. The Knicks destroying the Bucks early on in the season, but the Knicks do look a little bit better than we've seen them in the past. Julius Randle's coming out looking nice, and RJ Barrett isn't slumping like he was before. I find it interesting. He did note that he thinks that the Knicks will have advantages of playing at home without fans. Um, so I think that's something that we can keep an eye on looking forward, kind of just looking what their home record shows. Pacers over the Celtics, I think it's, to me, that was probably the best game. Um, Sabonis has come out on a tear, and I think it's clear that he's the preferred choice to play the five. It's just a matter of if they can deal Turner or not and what they can get for him. Um, I picked the Pacers to not make the playoffs, and early on, I looked like a fool for doing so. A lot of season left, so we'll see where that trends. And then Damian Lee, that game winner was obviously nice. It was intended to go to Steph Curry, but they couldn't get him the ball, and Damian Lee saved the day for the Warriors because they were winless up to that point as well. But that's just the Bulls being the Bulls. I mean, you can only expect so much from them.
Yeah, I mean, just about that last game there, I think that pretty much the Warriors needed that win. I know it's extremely early in the season. You're like, oh, it's the third game. You don't need a win. But I mean, if we're looking at it, like the Warriors had some pretty bad games going into that. And a lot of people think that even though they don't have Klay Thompson, I think most people would consider them a playoff team, considering they still have Steph Curry and they still have Draymond Green, or at least, making the play in. So I think that they kind of needed that. As for the Bulls, uh, it's weird. It seems like they're kind of getting better every game, uh, but they blew a lead again, like late in that game, which was pretty annoying. As for like some of the other takeaways, like you said, the Cavs backcourt has looked pretty good. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if Colin Sexton averaged 25 points per game this season. I think that he's very much capable of doing that. As for the Pacers Celtics game, they just played twice. They split the games, but I think that people need to give more credit to the Pacers because they can compete with all these higher tier teams. Um, yeah, I think that they can definitely compete with all these higher tier teams. Uh, they just need to be healthy, and really they haven't been for the past several years. Um, and then another thing, obviously, Brandon Ingram has looked really well so far, like you said. And the Hornets are a very interesting team. I don't know if they're completely defined, like in their rotation yet, obviously, but with like LaMelo still coming off the bench and stuff, we don't know really what's going to happen there by the end of the season. But they're very much capable. They've been in all these games that they've played. I think all their games have come down to like single digits. So on any given night, they can pretty much compete with um, anybody. So I wouldn't count them out of even like making the playoffs, play in, and if they were a lower seed in the playoffs by any chance, they could be scary. So that's some of the things that I'm taking away so far.
Yeah, and kind of just circling all the way back to that last game and even the Hornets, you were talking about rotations. I think with the Warriors, it's going to take some time for Steve Kerr to find his preferred rotation. He even talked about it. In the second game in that press conference, he said Michael Mulder, who's their 15th man, is going to get looks in the next game, and so he's really going as far back as he can to his bench. They lost Marquise Chris for the year. And that's unfortunate just because it seemed like Marquise Chris finally found a home in the league after being a former lottery pick. Once Draymond comes back, I think that stabilizes things a lot because it allows some guys to go back to the bench and bring some more offense there. Wiseman's just so raw right now that I think it's going to take some time for him to develop and find his step. But early on, he looks like he might be the second best Warrior. Kelly Oubre finally hit a 3-pointer. So that's big for them. Wiggins had his best game of the year, arguably, against the Pistons. That happened last night, so Tuesday night, since we're recording today on Wednesday. So I think a lot of it is just finding ways that Steph Curry can mesh with these guys because it's one thing for him to put up, 20, 25 shots and score 40 points, but if he's getting nothing else from Wiggins and or Oubre, then those 40 points are essentially meaningless. So I think between that and then just getting the presence of Draymond back in the lineup is going to be huge for them.
Yeah, and with that matchup, I think that game was a killer for the Bulls, obviously, and so far this season has kind of seemed like a killer for the Warriors with all those injuries and the struggles that you said. Um, but obviously, they're not the only teams that are getting worried. Uh, and actually, there's two teams that were pretty high in the standings last year that have been struggling big time so far. And I'm going to ask you, which team do you think has had bigger concerns so far between the Toronto Raptors and the Denver Nuggets?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty clearly the Raptors, just because, well, they're not missing anybody, so there's nobody out due to injury that's really caused them to do this. they're a team that always overperforms in the regular season, a team that always gets one of those top 3 seeds. Or when I say always, it's, that's been the way it's been in Toronto for the last 5-6 years. So between that and then the fact that anytime Kyle Lowry's not on the court, the team just can't get anything going. They just look so stagnant. They look like they don't know what they're doing without Kyle Lowry. Whereas the Nuggets are obviously struggling. But Jamal Murray's missed a game. JaMychal Green's still yet to be inserted into the rotation due to injury. And then I think that loss of Jeremy Grant is looming a little bit larger than some of us would have thought. Um, Obviously looked great in the bubble, and so I didn't want to overreact and proclaim him to be such a great player. But without him, they just look kind of lost. And I think Torrey Craig is even just as big of a loss because they just don't have that defensive presence. You can play Michael Porter, but you're going to get run off the court. But if you don't play Michael Porter, you can't develop Michael Porter. And he's clearly one of the best offensive talents in the league. And so Michael Malone's really got a head scratcher there. It's tough for him to make that decision because you want to play what many proclaim to be your third best player, but if he can't nail down basic defensive rotations, he's unplayable late in games. And so I think for them, they got some things to figure out, but I'm more worried about the Raptors.
Yeah, I think as for the Nuggets, I mean, the one thing the Nuggets have that the Raptors don't right now is a win. They beat the they beat the Houston Rockets the other day. Jokic had a big game, but of course, this is like a Rockets team that they're not 100% right now, and we don't even know what they're going to end up being like at the end of the year. They still haven't even found a win themselves as the time we're recording. But I mean, losing, you know, pretty bad to the Clippers and then losing twice to the Kings. If you're the Nuggets, I mean, yeah, everyone has bad days. You can lose to the Kings once, but losing to them twice, now it's like we're starting to look at concerns. Even if you're not 100% healthy, they should still be winning that game. Now, ultimately, I think that there should be more concerns though with Toronto, like you said. I think it's really starting to kind of bite them in the butt. The fact that they've gone like 2 off seasons now where it's like the free agent acquisitions or the trade acquisitions that they made were substantially on a lower tier than what they lost. I mean, losing Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green, I mean, Kawhi is a top 3 player in the NBA. And you brought in like Stanley Johnson, I believe, and Rondé Hollis Jefferson. That's not really going to make up for it. Yes, last year you got a great seed. And of course, they got eliminated by a lower seed in the second round. But this year, I mean, Kyle Lowry is the heart and soul, I'd say, of the Toronto Raptors. But I think Serge Ibaka has kind of been the energy for the past few years. So losing him as well as Marc Gasol and replacing him with guys like Aaron Baines, who is not bad, but I mean, I don't know if he really makes up for how much they lost, as well as like Alex Len. Um, it's just you're not. It's kind of hard to make up for all that, and it's starting to show right now. Now, obviously, I'm not expecting them to go like winless the whole season or like lottery team confirmed, but I think that there's a good chance that we might be seeing something with the 90s Bulls. Like, in a sense, like, remember the first year that Jordan left, the Bulls had a great season. And then the second year, before he eventually came back later that season from baseball, they were on the brink of missing the playoffs. So I think that they could be one of those lower seeds in the East this year. I just still expect them to make the playoffs. It's way too early to say that they won't, but I'm definitely a little bit concerned about them as well.
And the Raptors have always been a team focused on organic growth and development within the team. Heck, even Nick Nurse was promoted from G League coach to head coach of the team, and so it shows that they like to build within. Um, but we haven't seen any Malachi Flynn yet this year. Matt Thomas isn't necessarily jumping off the page. OG Ananobi, who I think is poised for a breakout year, hasn't necessarily done anything that leads me to believe that he's in the process of having one. Haven't seen what we needed to see out of Pascal Siakam. He looked great as a second option to Kawhi Leonard, but now that teams are able to pinpoint him as the go-to guy, it's a lot harder for him to do what he has done in the past. And then obviously losing those two bigs, Marc Gasol, he's more so of a presence guy. At this point in his career, he's a 16 to 18 minutes a game. He's not necessarily going to provide you huge numbers, but he's just such a stabilizer on the court. But then Serge Ibaka is still very productive at this point in his career, and losing that without bringing in anybody to replace it, like you said. Uh, Kind of just hoping that Boucher makes that jump or hoping that Aaron Baines can fill that role isn't necessarily something that I'd think is the way to go, and it's proven that it has hurt them thus far.
Yeah, and it's interesting the point that you bring up about Siakam. I think that he still has to make another significant jump a little bit in order to, become the solidified like first option that you can rely on. I think a good example of this is probably Donovan Mitchell. I think that in his rookie year, he went off. Nobody was expecting it because this team had just lost Gordon Hayward and they were supposed to be a lottery team. So when he went off, that was like it caught everyone by surprise. Then the next year, all these defenses they game planned for him, and I think that he had a slightly better season, but ultimately they didn't see the success that they wanted, and they were kind of disappointed earlier in the playoffs. And then I think this past year, yes, they were still first rounded, but I think that he showed a lot. He made the All Star team, and I mean, no one can question like his performance against the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs. So I think that he needs to take a jump like that if the Raptors want to rely on him long term.
I'd even argue that Jamal Murray needs to take somewhat of a similar leap. Um, in the bubble, he obviously caught everybody by surprise and had that electric first round matchup with Donovan Mitchell and put up great numbers against the Lakers, but we haven't seen that consistency in the regular season from him. Coming off an offseason where he signed the 5-year max, which I think was deserved after his bubble performance, you can't just sign that max and then disappear. You need to continually improve. And in his defense, or not in his defense, I guess he has Jokic. Teams pinpoint Jokic. Teams try to stop Jokic. So there's somebody else that the defenses are focusing on as well, which should make it a bit easier for Jamal Murray to insert himself and assert himself. Um, so I'm curious. I'm going to continue to monitor to see how he progresses throughout this regular season. But you can't score 50 points one night and then come back and score 9 the next night. There has to be some form of consistency in his play.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I think that he definitely needs to become a more consistent player down the line. But we're going to progress here to our daily picks for the week. We got 7 games, obviously, for a full week. We're going to start with New Year's Day. We got the Lakers versus the Spurs. Who do you got taking this one?
Yeah, I'm going to take the Lakers. Regardless if one of AD or LeBron sits, I still think the Lakers have enough to overpower San Antonio.
Yeah, I got the Lakers as well. I think that they should take this one. On the second, we got the Raptors Pelicans. What do you got?
Yeah, I think Toronto is going to start to right the ship, and I think they will take down New Orleans.
I got Toronto as well. Might be their first win. Who knows? But as for the third, we got the Trailblazers and Warriors, Damian Lillard and Stephen Curry. Who you got taking this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Warriors actually here. I think there's been a lot of talk recently surrounding the best point guard in the NBA. And some people are saying it's Damian Lillard and that Steph has to earn it back. And I think that Steph's going to come out ballistic.
I got the Trailblazers on this one. I think they kind of laid an egg against Utah, but ever since then they've started to like pick it up in the past few games. So I think that they'll win this one. As for the fourth, we got the Cavaliers and Magic, uh, two teams that are playing out of their mind right now. Who do you got?
Yeah, I look for Cleveland to continue their hot streak here and pick up a W.
I got Orlando. I think Markel Fultz has played well, and I think that he's going to have a good game against Cleveland here. As for the fifth, we got the Spurs again against the Clippers. What do you got on this one?
Yeah, I think the Spurs are going to lose both games to both LA teams, so I'm going to take the Clippers.
Yep, I got the Clippers taking this as well. As for January 6th, Hornets Hawks. Who's taking the W?
Yeah, Trae Young over LaMelo Ball for me.
I'm going with the Hornets. I'm telling you, the Hornets, they're definitely a random team. They could win on any given night. I think I did this the week before for the game this tonight against the Mavericks. So I guess we'll see about that, and we'll see next week. But as
You guys heard it here first. Garrett has the Hornets winning it all.
Hornets winning it all, uh, I bet Xander, who was a guest on our show last season one time, he'd be so happy to hear that right now. But as for January 7th, we got the Sixers and Nets. Who's taking the W there?
Yeah, I have the Nets winning it. Obviously, the loss of Dinwiddie, as we talked about earlier, is big, but too much firepower.
Yeah, I also got the Nets. I think definitely if KD and Kyrie play, they should win this one. But that's going to do it pretty much for all of us. I will say a few things here to end it off, but any final thoughts from you, Johnny?
Nothing big. I just want to wish everybody a happy New Year. Thanks for the support all year. I'm sure many of you guys, us included, are happy to see 2020 go, but excited to see what 2021 has to hold.
Yes, sir. I think 2021. Um, I mean, it can't get much worse from here, to say the least. But something else that's interesting to point out is that just before we started recording, Shams reported there were 0 positive COVID tests for the most recent reporting, which is a good sign. And as for the next few episodes, guests will be coming. Obviously, with the holiday season, it's been kind of crazy, been kind of hectic trying to plan stuff out. So don't you guys worry about that. We will have guests on the show very soon. But hope you guys enjoyed. Wait, were you gonna say something, Johnny?
No, I was just gonna say peace.
Oh yeah, peace.